Alright, today we're going to be doing intake manifold seals on a Ram Classic 1500 with the 5.7 liter. You can see here at the front of the cylinder head, we've got a pretty good leak in between the intake manifold and the cylinder head. And we're going to show you how to replace that today. Using a pick or screwdriver, you can get this hose free from the intake air box. Then we're going to go ahead and loosen this hose clamp and the hose clamp down here, so we can get this intake tube off, and don't forget to unplug your sensor here. These band clamps are 8mm, and if you have power tools, a little 1/4-inch bit driver goes a long way. Then you should be able to just wiggle this loose and get your intake hose out of the way, and we just place it over here by the air box. Then you're going to want to remove this engine cover. You're going to pry up with both hands on the left and the right side. I've already done that. And then you're going to lift it up in the front and pull straight towards you. Be careful not to break the studs in the back of this cover, and place this aside gently. And a little pro tip, if you've got the ability, let the air out of your front tires. This will lower the front end by a few inches and make it easier to gain access to the engine bay. Alright, next step, we're going to work on getting this little bracket out of here. And the best way to do this is to take a little right angle pick, and you want to get this little clip out of here. If you work your clip under here like this, you should be able to just pop that clip out. And now these lines here are freed from that bracket, and we can just get the bolt here, and there's a nut a little bit further down right here. It'll focus. We'll get those two things off and we can get the bracket out. Before we move that bracket, we do want to get the wiring harness off of this bracket. To get this wiring harness off, I like to use a little trim tool, stick it right underneath the clip, and then just give it a pry like that, and it should pop out. And there's one directly underneath the throttle body as well, and we'll go ahead and use our little trim tool on that as well. And then to get your throttle body connector off, I always like to use picks when I'm interacting with any kind of electrical connector, because they can get very brittle with heat. And that should be good. Now we have the harness away, we can get the bracket out. This bolt here is a 13mm, and I'm using it on a chrome extension and a little 3/8 impact. And the nut at the bottom of the bracket is also a 13mm, and I'm using a deep 13mm with a flex head ratchet just to break that loose and get the nut off. This bracket can now come out. Now we're going to take this hose the rest of the way out. If you give this some wiggles and pull up, that should come out. And then we can take the oil fill cap off and get this foam piece out. It's kind of like a clamshell foam piece. Be careful not to rip it along the seam. And put the oil fill cap back for safekeeping. Alright, next we're going to remove this line here. As you can see where my finger's touching, you want to depress. There are two tabs, one on the top, one on the bottom. You want to press those in, and this red lock should be able to be released, and then you can work this off. Alrighty, and then we're going to take this electrical connector off. I'm going to use my right angle pick again, and slip it in here before then pulling this connector off. These connectors do like to break, they're pretty brittle, and this can be hard to press in and actually get the lock to work. So that's why we use picks. And then we're going to want to use our trim tool to go ahead and get this clip out as well, so we can get the rest of the electrical harnesses off of this intake. Then remove this hose here, because the harness does loop inside of it, although it does just go from the front to the back of the intake, that hose does. Again, this is just to free up this harness so that when we get the intake out, it's easier. And again, I'm using an angle pick here just to free up this hose so we can then pull it off. Then we'll get the brake booster hose off. Use a pick again to go around the base of this. Giving it a twist will also usually help free up any kind of stuck rubber. Then before we can start working on any of the manifold bolts, we have to get all of the fuel injectors disconnected. There are 8 of them, and they're along the bottom of this fuel rail here. Getting these locking tabs undone can be some of the biggest pain of this whole job, but I recommend, again, using a pick so we can guarantee that you're not going to damage any of these connectors. Okay, so after getting all of our injectors disconnected, there are 3 more electrical connectors that still need to be disconnected. We've got one right at the back of the manifold here. This is on the passenger side. We've got one down here. And then the very last one is actually on the back of the intake manifold, and I usually get that after I've unbolted it and slid the manifold forward a little bit so you can actually have better access. To disconnect this electrical connector, you're going to want to slide this red locking tab back and then press down on the gray section in the middle and then slide this side out. This piece is currently attached to the manifold, so when you try and remove it, it will get stuck. So use your trim tool to pry this off. Next, there are 10 8mm intake manifold bolts, 5 on either side that run all the way back. So make sure you get all of those out. They may be a little bit crusty, but hopefully you don't have too bad of luck getting them out. And this tool setup I'm using does a really good job of reaching all the bolts. This is just like a 3-inch extension with a deep 8mm on a 3/8 Milwaukee cordless ratchet. All of these bolts are also captured by the intake manifold, so what you can do is pull them all the way up and then give them a little bit of a counterclockwise turn, and that will allow the bolt to kind of thread its way up into the manifold and stay up for you, so it doesn't fall down and get stuck while you're trying to get these out. Some of them might just pull out just like that, not a big deal at all. Just keep track of them, make sure you have all 10 when you go to put them back in. And I forgot to mention, we're going to want to take this transmission vent off. The vent runs all the way up the back of the engine and clips right here, so just use your trim tool to work this off. And then make sure this little plastic piece back here is separated from the fuel rail line there. And just place it off to the side, fuel line from the fuel rail. So you're going to want to take the locking tab here. I'm going to get my fingernail on it. Pull it towards yourself. You can also use a pick for this. I recommend a pick personally because that can be a little challenging to get this piece up. And then you're going to pinch both the back side here and the front side of the fuel rail together and push it down until you can see it coming out the bottom there. And that is how you release this fuel line from the fuel rail. Then you're going to have to give this line a little bit of a twist and pull, and it will come right off. Just be very careful around any kind of open fuel vapors. And now your intake manifold is free from the engine, and we can start picking it up. You're going to want to angle the front of it up, pull it towards you, and then don't forget about the electrical connector on the back of the intake. You don't want to pull it too far that you strain any of the wiring back there. Okay, I've got the manifold up, and what you're going to have to do is you're going to end up having to kneel up on the front of the truck here. I recommend getting one of these kneeling pads from Home Depot. They're pretty cheap, under 20 bucks, and it'll save your knees. But you can basically sit up here and reach all the way back to the back of your manifold here. The connector at the back of the intake manifold is going to be the hardest part because there's a locking mechanism. I did already get it off, but I'm going to remove the intake manifold from the situation now, show you where it connects, and show you what the connector looks like so you know how to take it off. Alrighty, with the manifold outside the vehicle, you can see this is what that last connector goes to. And I'll get in here and show you what the connector looks like. And this is the connector that was on the back side of the intake. You can see there is a red locking tab, which does make this connector quite annoying. Sometimes you have to get a pick back here to disconnect this lock, and then you have to try and squeeze this as hard as you can to get it off. You give it some wiggles and it will come loose. Did also want to mention, oftentimes there will be an additional plastic Christmas tree clip zip tie thing that holds the whole harness here to the back of the intake manifold. This can be a pain in the butt. You just hit it with a trim tool. Sometimes I've seen people even just cut these off. I don't really recommend doing that, but do your best to get it out. Okay, with the intake manifold out, there are a few things to be wary of because the seals are located on the bottom side of this manifold. You want to be careful when you flip this thing over because there are sensors. You get your PCV up here, you got these sensors off the back. You don't want to break anything, so I recommend being very careful. If you can, do it seated. Hold this thing in your lap and just be careful. Fuel will spill out of the fuel rail here, so don't hold it with that side facing yourself. Already am with it in my lap. We can get a good look at all the intake seals here on the bottom. While we're at it, we're also going to want to replace these PCV seals. There's one on either side. There's one right here and one over here. You already have the intake off, so you might as well do it. Like I said, when you flip it upside down, you're going to have some fuel spillage on the ground. So just account for that. Be smart. And to get these seals out, just take your pick, go in the little spot, and pull up. Same thing for your PCV seals here. Just stick your pick in it and lift it straight up. Alright, so these are the PCV and intake seals. These are the part numbers. Just in case you're interested, those are the PCV seal part numbers. And that's the intake seals part number. Alrighty, I've got all of the intake and PCV seals in there. And now we can focus on cleaning up the valley between the cylinder heads and getting all this junk out of here. Your best bet is to use a shop vac. Suck all this stuff up. Mice and rats and stuff, they love to get underneath these intakes and start chewing stuff up. So it isn't uncommon for us to see wiring issues with the MDS solenoids down here, strictly because of rodent intrusion. But like I said, we want to get all this cleaned up. It is 5 o'clock though, so I'm going to quickly clean this up and then we'll get back at it in the morning. Alrighty, we're starting off on a fresh morning here, and I've got the intake ports cleaned up a little bit. All we're looking to do here is clean up the mating surface of the ports themselves, and I vacuumed out the center here, the valley between the heads. These Scotch-Brite pads, usually they come in longer sheets, and you can see I've torn this one in half. And that's all I use to clean up the mating surfaces for the intake here. We're not looking to take any actual metal material off, you're just looking to get any of the gunk and grime knocked down, so these are nice and smooth to the touch. You can see there are still some marks and outlines, whatever. They're not coming across on my fingernail. I can't feel them at all, so that is plenty smooth enough. And any of the rest of the nonsense down here, I'm going to go ahead and blow out with an air gun before I remount the intake. If you've used brake clean or anything to blow any of the dirt or debris off of your intake seals here, intake ports here, I also recommend taking an air gun and sticking it into these ports and blow them all out. That way any of the junk that's made its way down into the intake doesn't get sucked into the engine when you go ahead and start it up. You want to make sure those ports are about as clean as you can get them. Make sure there's nothing sitting down on the valves. Everything looks really good. So again, I'll just do one more quick wipe down of these mating surfaces. Make sure they're nice and clean. Okay, now that our seals and our mating surfaces are all ready to go, we're gonna get this intake back in the vehicle, being very careful of any of the fuel that's still gonna continue to spill out of that rail. And then definitely you wanna focus on getting these back connectors plugged in as fast as possible. This one in the back being your problem child. Get that plugged in and locked before the intake is fully in place, and you'll have a much easier time. And then we can go ahead and get these connectors reseated back onto the intake. Alrighty, it's going to be pretty difficult to go ahead and get a good shot of this, but I'm going around the passenger side of the intake manifold to try and get this connector on the bottom of the sensor. Alright, and just secure it as best you can. You should hear it click. And that connector is now firmly seated. Give it a quick little tug test. Make sure that it is firmly seated on there, and lock the mechanism. Get your O2 sensor connector put back together and locked. And the other two electrical connectors on the back of the intake manifold, and then we can go ahead and get the bolts in. You may have to shift the intake around for these bolts to find their threads, but I recommend at least starting a handful of these on either side by hand, so the manifold is properly centered before you start just trying to get the rest of these bolts tightened down. Following this sequence from 1 to 10, you're going to go ahead and tighten all of those bolts down to 12 Newton meters or 9 foot-pounds. And if you're not going to follow that torque sequence exactly, biggest thing to think about here is tightening the bolts in the middle of the manifold in a cross pattern sequence, starting from the inside out and front to back. And as long as you kind of follow that and you don't over tighten these, you won't risk cracking the manifold or having any weird port misalignment. And now we're just going to get the rest of all of our connectors plugged in. Start by getting your fuel injectors connected and locking them in. And you want to listen for an audible click before you lock it down. Then you're going to route your vent line, reconnecting it back to the fuel rail here. And your little Christmas tree clip here. And we can go ahead and get the fuel line back on. And to secure this, we're going to push back up from the bottom here. Make sure you hear a nice click, and then you can lock this back down. Then we will reconnect our brake booster vacuum line here, making sure it's nicely seated. And also always inspect any of your rubber hoses for cracks or holes in them. Vacuum leaks can lead to all sorts of issues. Okay, then we're going to resecure this hard line for the purge solenoid and make sure that this is locked down. Then we'll go ahead and route all of our harness. Get the harness routed so that your purge solenoid connector here is able to be plugged in. Then the wiring runs up to this point here. If this clip isn't completely destroyed and you can reseat it back in here, that'd be great. But these do often break when you try and pull them apart. So just try and route the harness in the correct location. Then the rest of the harness here is going to run along the bottom of your throttle body, and we can connect this throttle body connector, make sure it's seated properly, and then lock it. And then you can just leave your intake air temp sensor connector just up here hanging out while we go ahead and get this bracket installed. And as we're getting this bracket put into place, I advise using the AC lines that likely have marks still on them to help get this thing lined up and in place. And before tightening anything down, we want to make sure that our holes are all lined up. You can see the bolt hole here. The bolt hole here is lined up, and it's on the threads down here. Sorry, the camera does not want to focus. And using my cordless 3/8 ratchet, We're going to use a 13mm socket to tighten down the nut on the, and the same socket with a little 3-inch extension for the bolt on the top here. And then we can go ahead and lock up those AC lines. And we've got just a couple more hoses to put back on. So we'll go ahead and make sure that these are in place. And this line should run just like this. Then I'm going to remove the oil cap and reinstall this little foam piece here that you were very careful to definitely not rip earlier, I'm sure. And just remember the bottom piece of this foam tucks over the harness. Just like that. Reinstall your fill cap. And then we're going to reinstall this hose here that runs over to the intake box. Then you're going to reinstall this hose here. It is easier to install with this side first. Stick it on the air box. And then just slip it over this little port here. Then you're going to get your engine cover put back on. Remember, you want to get those 2 prongs in the back of the intake manifold, and then you should be able to just push down lightly on either side and secure this into place. And we'll get the last of this intake piping on. And remember, these are 8mm band clamps, and get this intake sensor plugged back in. And that's how you do the intake manifold seals and PCV seals on a Ram Classic with the 5.7. Any of the Ram Classics with the 5.7 should be the same or extremely similar. You should not have to remove the alternator to do it. If you do have another Ram truck with a 5.7 in it, things may be just a smidge different, especially if you have one of the large MGU units right here. You may have to remove that to get the intake out.